There's no other thing in my life with writing books that provides me the same beautiful combination of frustration, of conflict, of exuberation. I wake up every single morning at 5:36 a.m. and I write for 2 hours. And at the end of it, my wife wakes up and she said, "How did it go this morning?" And I say, "Shit, I'm a failure. I'm never going to make this work." And then I wake up the next morning and I'm excited to do it again. There's nothing else in the world where that exists for me. That's how I know that books are my thing.
This week, I'm sharing part of my conversation with Jonathan Goodman. John is the creator of the Personal Trainer Development Center. He hosts a popular podcast, the Obvious Choice podcast. He's written multiple books. He's incredibly prolific. He's got a book coming out, but he's already written the next one. I will have all the links in the description and show notes below, but he's written Ignite the Fire, Viralnomics, and now the Obvious Choice, among others. He spent over 20 years teaching people how to build fitness businesses, how to get fit themselves, how to build better lives. And, if I might say on a personal note, John is someone that quite quickly, in the last few months that we've become acquainted, become something of a friend and someone that I deeply admire. Specifically because I think there are a lot of people online in the world that frame or position themselves along similar lines. There are fitness influencers, there are business coaches, there are people that frame themselves as people that can tell you about these things. What I find incredibly interesting about John is out there talking about these things, helping people to build fitness businesses, helping people to get fit, helping people to be better business owners. But he's doing it for the love of the game. He's someone that, in my mind, just genuinely cares. He's walking the walk, talking the talk. He's a father, he's a family person. He's out there doing all of those things for himself, not just for the sake of becoming an influencer, not just for the sake of selling things or making money. He's doing it with some deep sense of earnestness. And I think that came across certainly to me in all of our interactions. It will certainly come across to you. You're going to hear us talking about a wide variety of things at the intersection of life and business. We talk about the joy and pain of writing books, as John has written several. We talk about travel and what it teaches us about life balance. We talk about productivity. We've both at various points struggled with productivity, how we found some tips and tricks to be more productive, how the environment that we have can influence our level of productivity. We talk about the importance and the role that intentional breaks can have, how to be more efficient by doing less, whether or not you should take advice, the trap of trying to take all advice and why some advice might not be meant for you. We talk about the trap of success and how being good at everything can have some pitfalls. We talk about the importance of committing to your passion. And then we talk about a lot of business adjacent things. So like the best way to sell a book. John shares some incredible secrets, both from his experience and from things that he's come across about sales and marketing. The secret to becoming the obvious choice as a business owner that's seeking customers. We talk about how to win customers' hearts with simplicity and originality. We talk about the importance of understanding your customer needs. So I think if you are someone that is adjacent to entrepreneurship in any way, if you run a business or want to run a business, if you want to live a better life, if you want to get better with your fitness, I think there will be something in this conversation for you. You can get the full show notes, the transcript, and read my newsletter at theknowledge.io, and you can find John online on Twitter at It's Coach Goodman. His personal website is theptdc.com. There's a lot of great stuff there. And if you love this episode, please do share it with a friend. And don't forget to leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts, because it helps us tremendously to understand what you love and to do more of it, and also to reach other listeners just like you.
Everything is 2 times as expensive. Like I'd get a coffee and a sandwich and it'd be like $27.
Is Canada quite affordable relative to the US? I'm still waiting to go.
It depends on where you go. Canada is so spread out and so different, and really only has 2, maybe 3 like major towns. Toronto is one of the most expensive cities in the world. Like a townhouse around the corner from us that backs onto the railway is $1.7 million. It's Toronto, but like then my brother lives in Nova Scotia, which is one of the province islands on the East Coast. And, a 4-bedroom house in a great neighborhood across the street from a big park in a great school district, whatever, is like $350,000.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
so radically different. Like if you live
Right.
in one of the hubs, food and stuff is always really expensive. I mean, Canada's becoming a very difficult place to live economically, I would say.
I think you spend something like at least 4 months in the year traveling. What, first of all, like, why do you do that? Why do you enjoy it? Where do you go? How do you choose where to go? And you also have kids. How do you figure out what to do with them as well?
Yeah, I have a 7-year old and a 2-year old, and my wife is pregnant with our next as well,
Wow.
Boo and Hay.
Congrats. Amazing.
What do we do with them? My 2-year-old, we drag him along, is the answer. My 7-year-old is in public school in Toronto, and then we unenroll him. And then we have, like right now, actually, our nanny is a teacher and was a teacher for 20 years. She's from the States, but she actually got injured and isn't here yet. So we put him in a school here, basically like 3 days a week, 2 days a week. And then we do homeschooling with him a little bit as well. And then there's just like in between school all over the place. Hey, it's 14-1 Mexican pesos to Canadian dollars. How much did we just spend in Canadian dollars? What kind of change is there? That type of stuff. And so it's worked out pretty well. He's in grade 2. Every year we take it year by year is the answer. And it's worked out pretty well so far. This is year 13 that we've done winters away. And so I've spent a minimum of 4 months abroad every year for the last 13 years. And I mean, you ask like what I gain out of it. I mean, number one, I escaped the Canadian cold. So that's an added benefit. Physically, health wise, I've actually done some back of the napkin math of how much in between movement you lose by virtue of it being cold and snowy and the weather being crappy outside. And it's astonishing. For example, like when I used to have an office, I built an office now at my home outside, but when I used to have an office, I'd bike 15 minutes to and from. It's just a personal rule that I have that I would never work anywhere that's more than a 15-minute bike ride from home. But 15 minutes either way, let's say the weather's really bad in Canada 5 months out of the year. So 15 minutes, that's 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, that's 2.5 hours times a month, back of the napkin math. You're talking 10 hours of movement a week.
Yeah.
That is simply gone. 40 hours a month, 200 hours a season. I mean, if you calculate that over 10 or 20 years, you're talking like 20 days of movement that is just gone. And so I think about the decisions that I'm making today and whether my future self will help me for those decisions. And a lot of them have to do with health and fitness and not necessarily a 45-minute workout. But what am I doing in between those workouts? How can I optimize the amount of activity and healthy active living in between those workouts and getting sunlight and being in a place where I want to go for walks, or if you go somewhere, you don't get into a car. Wherever we live, even abroad, walkability is actually a very important decision maker in where we choose to live. Like, okay, I want to go to an island in Greece. Well, what island do you go to? Where do you settle on in that island? Like, how do you choose? And so what I'll actually do, just as one example, when we lived on Crete, we lived in a little town called Amudara in Crete, which is you fly into Heraklion, it's like 30, 40 minutes basically out of there. It's like a nothing town. We were there in a shoulder season. It's a local tourist town kind of. But the only co-working space on Crete at that time was in Amudara. So I found that. I set that as the Airbnb pin. And then I looked for Airbnbs within a 15 to 20 minute walk of the co-working space and used that as how we decided where to live. And then, yeah, you find stuff wherever there's parks anywhere. There's restaurants, cafes, whatever, anywhere. That's how we kind of decide when we're going to different places in the world. And then, with the family, we try to move around a little bit less, I guess, then.
It's funny. Something you mentioned reminded me of something I was thinking about. I think it was just yesterday. Ironically, I was on someone else's podcast, and I think I was just talking about this idea that, first of all, I am surprised at the extent to which the darkness, particularly, we mentioned I live in London, the darkness really affects me. And I would think,
oh my goodness,
in lots of other contexts, I think of myself maybe as quite resilient. I wouldn't think that, I'm someone that's going to be massively affected simply by it being dark so much earlier. But I think in lots of different ways. First of all, on my mood. Sometimes there are times I catch myself, just feeling a bit glum, and I'm wondering, is it like business isn't doing well? Is it something? There's some tension in what I'm doing. And then I realize I look outside and it's 3:30 in the afternoon and it's just black. It's dark.
Right.
And just touching on what you were saying as well in terms of going out and how that influences exercise. I have some scales and they connect to Wi-Fi, so it just tracks the stuff. I don't always check it. I go on the scales every day.
What's
but
this?
I don't
scales like for weight, like for checking your weight.
weight scales.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just I'm trying to lose some weight at the moment.
Sure, no, that's fine.
But
I don't know if like you're
okay.
wacky. Like it's funny whenever like people who speak English make fun of British for their English. It's like I will have you pay attention to the name of the language that you're speaking and the name of the country that I live in for who is actually correct in the words that they're using to speak this language.
So
Yeah,
obviously I've been trying to do this fitness journey thing, and I was looking back at so I can see for the last 4 years, the tragic up and down roller coaster of
right.
me every year trying to lose some weight and then putting on some weight. And it's always quite consistently starting from around this time of year. Like ironically, just in the coldest months that suddenly I just put on a ton of weight. It
Yeah,
also tracks with, I stop weighing myself around that time. I go home for Christmas and then I come back and I'm not really, by the time I then
right.
start tracking again, my weight's gone up. So hopefully that changes this year. But
Where's
it's
home
this
for you?
idea that
Is home for you in the UK somewhere
well,
else?
no, it's also in the UK. It's also in London, but
Oh, okay,
my
okay,
parents are like an hour or two away. Enough distance that I'm not going to bump into them on most days, but it's
got it.
still some intentionality. Yeah.
I mean, I think people take that for granted. The power of in between movement, you kind of have to engineer your life to optimize for that. You're not going to notice it on any given day. I mean, that's the difference between consistency and intensity, isn't it? It's like you go to the dentist, that's intense. You go there for cleaning. Consistency is brushing your teeth. Can you miss a day? Yeah. How many days can you miss? No idea. How long do I have to brush my teeth until it makes a difference? I have no clue either. But if you don't do it consistently for long enough, no matter how many times you go to the dentist to get a cleaning, your teeth are going to rot. But it's kind of hard to measure in the moment. Intensity is a workout in the gym. Consistency is the movement in between. You need both.
And it's definitely something I take for granted. So the other thing that came up is funny enough. So I play video games on occasion. I play a game called Overwatch, and that's pretty much the only game I play. And I was telling someone that I was getting a PS5 just to have a better experience playing this game, and they were like, "But you only play one game. Doesn't that seem like a waste?" And I was like, "This isn't something I do habitually. The specific reason I like playing it is because you play a game and it only lasts about 10 minutes or so." So it's actually just a good break in between doing other things. So, as I'm working and my mind is very active doing whatever, it's a good time boxed, let me switch off or context switch, and then I can come back to working. So I literally just switch it on, play, and then switch it off. But my so I had a PS4 up until just now. I didn't switch it on until August, and I last switched it off December of last year. So just before I went home for the holidays. And I was trying to think of why was it easy for me not to play for the majority of the year? I didn't even touch it. And then suddenly, well, first of all, I was working on a book project. So, okay, life was getting a bit tough. I needed some kind of stress release. But then I'm only playing now more than I have the entire year. And I was like, oh, it's because during the summer or the warmer months, when I want to clear my head, I go for a walk. I just go outside. And that's such an easy thing to do. And it's so easy to have this habit, if I'm trying to build positive habits, it's a lot easier to build that when it's warmer. And you don't necessarily think of that as being the reason, but you can just do it instinctively. Whereas now when it's cold and it's dark, if it gets to 3 o'clock and it's already dark, I am not thinking, oh, let me go for a stroll. I'm going to have to wear my gloves, going to have to wear a jacket. And so it's interesting how, some of these environmental factors can also then shape our behavior, even when we have good intentions of, here's what I want to do, here's how I want to live. Suddenly, your behavior can actually be shaped by your environment in some of those ways as well.
It really needs to be designed for. Have you ever been turned on to Dr. Gloria Mark's work?
No, I haven't actually.
Oh, she's fascinating. So she heads up what's called the informatics lab at the University of California. And so her area of study specifically is attention span and focus and how that interacts with technology. And so she wrote a book called Attention Span, and the reason why I was turned on is we share a literary agent. And so my agent was like, yo, you would love this woman. And I interviewed her and read her book, and she's great. But what she actually talks about is exactly what you were saying. You mentioned something about how you play video games almost as like a break for work, and you actually do it perfectly. These cognitive snacks. She is very protective around, you should waste time. Rote tasks are actually very, very useful cognitively. And the same thing, movement snacks, I call them. Like, I'll go outside in my office and I'll rake leaves for 20 minutes, for example, or mow the lawn or do some gardening, light gardening or whatever. But Also, flip through my phone and social media, doing things that you kind of hear all the time that they're a waste of time, but they're actually not. Your brain needs time to relax. And a lot of the problems that we have, I notice this. I don't know if you notice this, David. Tell me if you do. At the end of the day, some days I feel brain fog and I feel like I'm burnt out. And then other days, at the end of the day, I feel energized and on fire. And it doesn't seem to correlate with the amount of work that I got done that day. What it seems to correlate with is actually how many different things I did that day. And so I have found that the amount of times that I jumped to a different task or task switched using Dr. Mark's language, you're focusing on a project and then you just check social media, or I'm talking to you on the podcast, but I'm kind of like going through like Instagram, even though, you don't notice, maybe you notice, maybe you don't notice. All that my brain is doing there is pulling up new mental schemas. It takes us somewhere around 22 minutes to get into something else. It's cognitively very taxing energetically to jump to something else. And so to protect against that, where we're being constantly distracted, if you're focusing on something and you need a break, it's actually much more healthy to set a timer like you did, 10, 20 minutes, whatever it is, and then play video games. In her studies, it was Candy Crush. Basically, rote tasks that allow you to be minimally engaged. Could be going for a walk, could be playing video games, could be scrolling through social media, right? So long as you have kind of an end time. She actually talks about how useful that is, but not if you're switching back and forth between it. It's a way to almost keep your brain in one mental schema for longer and switch less. And I found that when times are going well and I'm focusing, which is not all the time, of course, but when times are going well, I find that I'm able to stick to that. And when I'm really brain foggy and exhausted at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, you idiot. This is because you managed your email poorly. This is because you were working on the book, but then you just kept checking Twitter, idiot. And so it's useful to be reminded of that. But I love the fact that you jump to video games for 10 minutes, so long as you're not doing it for 5 hours,
Yes, yeah. Okay, let me take this in two directions quickly, but I think this is also a useful segue into your life as a writer, and that's something I definitely want to get into. We'll also talk about your background, but I'd love to know a bit more about, how you schedule your time, because I think you've already started working on your next book, so it's incredible.
It's almost done.
Yeah, exactly. So how prolific you are. But just to go on this, I'll take it in two directions and then I'll share one random thing that I learned for myself, and I'll only say it to the extent that it's useful to anyone listening. So just going from what you were saying, I definitely empathize with that. And I find that it is incredible how often someone might ask me at the end of the day, what did you do today? I will say, I have no idea. I was sitting at my desk the whole day. I have a little home office here and I was working hard, I hope, but I was bouncing around between so many things. My attention was going here and there. At various points during the day, I might have been firefighting something or other. I've got my notebook here on my desk, and perhaps I did write some of the to-dos of some of the main things I needed to do. But by the end of the day, I don't even remember the stuff. I'm going to have to check my notebook if you ask me what I did or how good the day was. So I think that's the one part of it that definitely resonates for me. But the other thing is, interestingly enough, I find there's a difficulty or a balance for me, and this might be my personality, so this is where I'd love to hear, how you do some of your routine, where personality wise, when I know I have things to do, my tendency is to borrow in. Okay, I wake up in the morning, I come straight to the office, I make some coffee, and I'm gonna sit here for the next however many hours until stuff gets done. I might waste a bunch of time during that time and it might not be as productive as I would like, but I'm going to sit here and I'm going to make sure things get done. But what I find interesting is, so last month, I do this thing every November. You might have heard of it, called NaNoWriMo, National November Writing Month. It's like a yearly challenge to write 50,000 words in November. But usually that's a novel kind of thing. So I'd been working on a book earlier this year and I worked on that till October. And then I switched to this novel project for November. But what was interesting about that is that there were days where maybe I would co-write with some friends and we'd meet up in central London. And what I found is some of those days where I'm actually doing not necessarily doing three things in the day, but moving context 3 times in the day. So in the morning, I go over here and I meet a friend and we got some donuts and we sat down and did some work. And then we went to a business event, an entrepreneurship event. And then after that, we sat down and we did some more work. And then after that, I came home and then I did some more work. And in each of those sessions, I still had that fixed time. But somehow, because I was moving around in between, I don't know if it's just the locomotion or it's the context switching, but I actually had more energy. And each of those sessions, cumulatively, I got a lot more done than, let's say, the day before, where I was sitting at home the whole time, just trying to force myself to do loads of work. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that. The last thing I will mention, just because you mentioned it with energy, that I found for myself is I wear glasses, not all the time because my eyesight's usually fine, but it's usually for screens. I think I have the opposite of what most people have. So when things are up close for me, my eyes kind of go double a bit. But I was having, just generally, I didn't think of it as an issue, but sometimes in the evening, I'd get really tired, maybe around 10 o'clock or maybe a bit earlier. And I actually just realized it's eye strain. I had no idea. Like, it's crazy that I've just realized a few weeks ago, I could put my glasses on in the evening and suddenly I have so much more energy.
Interesting.
Yeah. Hey, we'll get back to the episode in just one moment, but I wanted to tell you very quickly about my newsletter. I started sharing everything I was learning online and a few thousand people came along for the ride. I send 3 regular emails. Brainwave fortnightly on a Tuesday, which is about the intersection between technology, philosophy, and psychology. Then every week on a Thursday, I send Revelations, and that's about creativity and productivity. And then finally, every other weekend, I send Wayfinder, and that's about decision making. So people in the audience actually send me really tough problems that they're working through, and I help to deconstruct them using mental models and decision-making frameworks. So if you'd like to subscribe, you can join me and over 20,000 incredibly driven people at theknowledge.io. Okay, back to the episode.
I have heard that is something with other people for sure, that they don't realize how hard they have to work to focus on something. All of this is just energy. I mean, that's all it is. It's energy. You only have a finite amount of energy. Certain things that you do, I think, can create more if you're working your best way. But, it does go away depending on what you're doing. And so you have to be careful to protect it. I don't know. I mean, what'd you ask about? Writing? Like, how do you focus on
so
that?
like, how do you manage your energy? And because you're quite prolific in terms of getting the work done. And it seems like you have good. Okay.
I'm not.
All right.
I mean, I am the laziest, ambitious person you will ever meet. I am primarily motivated by not wanting to do much. And so I love coming up with ideas. And I've kind of come to appreciate that if I get like an hour and a half to 2 hours of good work a day, like it's a good day. And so I optimize for that. I cannot do that much. Maybe I used to be able to. I'm 39 years old. Maybe I just don't have the energy. But also, I have 2 kids. I've got parents I want to see. I have fitness that I want to do. And I also love to read. I love to read fiction. I love to read. So like, there's a lot of other things pulling up my time, which I think a lot of the time with perhaps young, ambitious people, they almost have too much time. And it would be better if they actually constrained their time and built more structure around that. Because you're never going to be more efficient and get better work done faster than sitting in a coffee shop with 10% power left on your laptop with no charger. And so Can you manufacture that for yourself to some extent? It might be frustrating, but like there's some usefulness in that. I can't do any focused work really by the time that my family wakes up in the morning. By 8 o'clock or so in the morning, I'm pretty much done everything important that I have to do. And so that's a really useful constraint, because if you think about what happens then as second order consequences from that, number one, I have to be really, really good at prioritizing my one thing. What is your thing? What is your thing that you think that you can become truly world class at, that you want to be great at? How can you design everything else that you do to support that one thing that you do? Most of the reason why people never get ahead these days, I think, is not because they don't try to do anything important, not because they don't know what to do, not because they're good. It's because they do too many damn things at the same time and they never focus on one thing that they can be great and accept the trade-offs, because becoming a grown-ass adult is accepting trade-offs and accepting the trade-offs that because I'm so focused on my books as the one thing, my businesses are not going to grow the same way, for example. And so they have to serve another function, and or I give away most of them. So, I own 2 other main businesses. I mean, there's kind of a third, but I own 2 other main businesses that are really active businesses that are doing pretty well. And in both cases, I own 100% of the business, but I have a core operator who has a huge amount of the upside. And most everybody involved in working in the business is paid largely based off of very, very, very generous incentivization, commission, or profit sharing structures. And as a result, then they have a lot of ownership in the product. They have a lot of the upside in the product, which means that I can kind of chill out a little bit. So what I'm doing is I am sacrificing upside in those businesses, appreciating that they're going to still feed me more than enough that I'm ever going to need. But it's actually a terrible business decision, but it's a wonderful personal decision. And so I've accepted that trade-off because that is necessary for me in order to put really 80 to 90% of my time and focus and energy into the books. And so the first question, of course, is like, how do you figure out what your thing is? That's the question everybody asks me. And so I have a really simple process, which is you write down, I mean, your notebook is a little bit too pretty, David. I like these. I like really crappy dollar store notebooks because then you can scribble in them and not feel bad about it. I find that when I have a notebook that's too pretty and too nice, I try to be too perfect in it and then it just becomes useless. So I like really cheap notebooks. And so I sit down with this cheap notebook and I'll write down all of the things that I feel like I should be doing or that I might be doing, write a book, door-to-door sales, affiliate marketing, start a podcast, whatever, all of these things that we feel like we should be doing, right? And you can do an immediate gut check usually, and because you really don't want more than 4 or 5 on that list ultimately. So if you have more than that, you can do a gut check and you can just be like, and that's kind of one of those things that I feel like this other guy tells me that I should do and maybe is good information for other people, but bad advice for me. Like it so clearly isn't in my natural attributes or skills or energies or whatever, right? Which is fine. There's a lot of good information out there that's bad advice, and you have to be able to begin to recognize that and appreciate and respect other people that are just playing a different game than you are in this world and celebrate when they do well and not desire what they have because it's not the game that you're playing. So you write down, these 4 or 5 things, and then you go through a series of testing cycles that are 2 weeks long. And the reason that it's 2 weeks is 2 weeks is long enough to test how you feel towards it and answer 3 questions that I'm going to give you. It's not long enough, though, to get any kind of a result that you can measure. Because what you're not going for is a result. What you're going for here is confidence in the process. That's what you need. If you wanted to get a result, you really had to give a year plus into each testing cycle, which you just don't have enough time to do. And so in those 2 weeks, you are all in on that thing, right? If it's like a podcast, for example, you're going to record a podcast every single day for those 2 weeks. You're going to exclusively study podcasting, listen to other people talk about podcasting, read books on it, go down Reddit rabbit holes about podcasting. You're going to learn everything that you can and obsess about podcasting. And you're going to record every single day. You don't care if anybody listens. The 3 questions that you answer at the end of the 2 weeks are, do I feel like I could get good at this? Do I like this? And do I feel like this presents me an opportunity that's going to fulfill all of my needs? Once you can answer yes to all 3 questions, you found your thing. Is that the best opportunity out there in the world? Maybe, maybe not. Would you recognize it even if it was? Like if I were to find the best opportunity in the world for me to do something content-wise, business-wise, whatever, would I even know if it was the best even if I found it? Like, no. And so to look for the best is it's a ridiculously foolish endeavor. Instead, what you're going for is confidence in the process to find your thing. Once you find your thing, you have to commit a minimum of 3 to 5 years in that thing. If you don't enjoy and love the researching about it, that ain't your thing. You should want to read endless books about it. You should want to join the Reddit rabbit holes. You should be upset. Like I can't stop listening to people talk about books and marketing books and writing great books. It doesn't, there's no end to that, to my energy towards this. There's no other thing in my life with writing books that provides me the same beautiful combination of frustration, of conflict, of exuberation. Like I wake up every single morning at 5:36 a.m. and I write for 2 hours. And at the end of it, my wife wakes up and she said, how did it go this morning? And I say, shit, I'm a failure. I'm never going to make this work. And then I wake up the next morning and I'm excited to do it again. There's nothing else in the world where that exists for me. That's how I know that books are my thing. Once you find your thing, you point everything towards that. You figure out your best time of the day. You commit that time of the day to that thing. Nothing else gets in the way. All of the other platforms, content, businesses, everything that you do, if you decide to do it, has to point towards the thing. I have a podcast. My podcast's sole purpose, its priority, is to workshop ideas that I'm writing in my books. It's to test ideas. It's to force me to show up and present them and read them out loud to two other people who I trust and admire that are in my blind spot. My co-host on that podcast, Amber, so I'm like I come from a middle to upper class white Jewish family in Canada, Toronto, right? My co-host on the podcast, Amber, is the daughter of a military family, single mother, son far along the spectrum, living in the Bible Belt in South Carolina. And then my other co-host is Ren, who's the black son of a preacher in North Carolina. Like, they're there because I love them, because I respect them, and because they see things and bring metaphors and give insights to my books that would not otherwise be there. So my podcast is designed to make my books better. Anything else that happens that's good is a fortunate byproduct. I have no idea how many people listen. I don't ever look at the stats and the downloads. It's completely and utterly irrelevant to me because those metrics, that data does not correlate to my desired outcome from being on that platform. Goodhart's law states that when the measure becomes the goal, it ceases to be a good measure. The measure cannot be downloads unless your goal is to be a famous podcaster. My goal is not to be a famous podcaster. It's to make the best damn books possible. And so I can't measure the success of my podcast based off of how many downloads it gets. I have to measure it based off of how good of a job it's doing helping me write the best damn books possible. And so that's just one example, but everything has to point towards that thing. Once you found whatever that thing is for you.
Sure, that makes sense. And I think there were two questions I was going to ask, but I think you've partly answered the second one, which was going to be essentially, because you're doing the podcast, but the podcast specifically helps you do your ultimate goal. And I was going to ask, to what extent do those things need to overlap? I think Nathan Barry has this idea of strip malls and skyscrapers where some people might do lots of different businesses, but they're kind of all laid out alongside each other and they're all different businesses. And he suggests instead that you should build like a skyscraper where all of the things stack up one on top of the other and they're all vertically aligned doing the same thing. But the other thing I was going to ask is, how did you learn this? And what was the process of figuring that out? Specifically because I think you were maybe 18 when you first became a personal trainer, and then you were 24 when you wrote the first book, which ended up doing really well. But I think it could be very easy to say, oh, I'm already good at this one thing, I should go in that direction. Or now I'm good at this thing, I should go in that direction. And lots of people, especially when they're competent and good at things, can be pulled off in different directions based on, right now I'm passionate about this thing, or right now I've just found out that I'm good at this thing. How do you find that very early on, as opposed to, when everything's working?
I mean, the answer is I did not find it very early on. I stumbled upon it very early on, and then I completely ignored the signals that it was giving me for a very long period of time and did a whole bunch of other shit, and then I found my way back to it. I mean, you're right. Like, you've done your research, so thank you. Yeah, I mean, a week after my 18th birthday, I was a personal trainer. I was studying kinesiology at university, so I worked at the university gym. So by the time I graduated university, basically ended my 20th year, I was a personal trainer full-time. And I wrote a book for trainers at 24, but, I reached a point that a lot of trainers get to, which is kind of unique. Maybe a lot of other careers don't have this, where I was making as much as you could make as a personal trainer. Like at 22 years old in Toronto, I was charging as much as you could charge. I was full with clients. I was referring my overload of clients to other trainers. And I was the senior trainer earning a small salary. So like I kept having this nagging feeling of, is this what my life is going to feel like? Going to be like? It was fine when I was like 22 years old, great. I'm young, I'm energetic, but it kind of hit me. I was playing ice hockey. I think Steve Thomas is the only British ice hockey player. So it's a sport where we strap knives to our feet and skate around on the ice. So I was playing ice hockey and I got tripped. I got slew-footed, which basically means somebody takes the stick, they push one skate into the other skate and you kind of topple over. And it's just like a really cheap way to trip somebody. And you're like, you jerk. So I got slew-footed. I pulled a hamstring and I was off my feet for 2 weeks, which means I couldn't train, which means I couldn't make money. And that was the moment when it hit me, when I said, clearly I need to figure out something else here. I don't know what it is. And so I just went deep into looking into anything. I studied residential real estate investing for 6 months. I built 2 business plans for smoothie operations. And then I came across this book That was a chapter in one of the books of many books I was reading at that time. I was just going to the library, I had tons of time reading. And it was this book called Multiple Streams of Income, written by a guy named Robert G. Allen. I have no idea how good the book is, but there was a chapter in the book on something called infopreneuring. This is like 2010. The idea that you could sell your information and knowledge on the internet was mind-blowing. It existed. Don't get me wrong. You had like Napoleon Hill, you had these types of self-help gurus that were selling information, but it was very much behind the scenes. And so this guy was talking about real estate in there. He was talking about all kinds of stuff. There was just this chapter, and there was this image in that book, and the image was this big circle that was meant to denote like the universe, and around the circle were all the income streams that you can derive out of it. And in the middle of the circle was a book. And so his point was, you write a book and then you can derive all of these income streams around it. It was one of many ideas that I had at that time. And for whatever reason, it was the idea that stuck. It was the idea that I was able to keep doing without it feeling hard, even though it, looking back, was very hard. And I self-published it, then I had to figure out a way. I mean, I tell my story and say, you know, it's best defined by being in a state of optimistic ignorance the entire time. I think these days, most people are pessimistically overinformed. You know too much about all of the reasons why you shouldn't do something, or all of the best ways to do a thing, that you overthink it, or all of the other people already doing the thing. Like, I wrote that book when I was a 23-year-old personal trainer for personal trainers, not because I don't think that other people probably were saying the same things at me at the time. It just wasn't shoved in my face the same way. This was 2010. Right. The book came out in 2011 when I was 24. So I was optimistically ignorant. I had to figure out publishing. I was a 24-year-old personal trainer in a small gym in Toronto. I didn't know any authors. I certainly didn't know any editors. But like, how do you find editors? Well, I don't know who editors are, but I know where books are. So I went to the bookstore. I looked up best-selling fitness books. I looked up the names of the authors. I sent some cold emails and I said, can I meet your editor? Some of them made introductions and I hired one of the editors, and so on and so on and so forth. It was just one of those things that stuck, where I think naturally I was willing to figure out the next step, and it didn't feel hard. It felt natural. There were a lot of things that did not, like real estate investing, for example. Hell, man. Yo, David, if I started buying real estate in Toronto in 2010, holy shit, I would not be in Mexico. I'd be on an island somewhere. But it wasn't my thing. And so it stuck, but then I kind of ignored it. Then I became an entrepreneur. Then I built a business off of it. I built a blog that became the biggest blog in my space. I've put on 5 conferences. I've done 8 digital programs. I've done 3 membership sites. I built a software platform. I had a web comic. I had a fitness web comic where we sold merch. I actually mentioned to Jay, who you know, I was like, I don't know if we'll use this anymore in content, but I just actually, for the first time ever, figured this out. I've actually built 7 different business verticals that have generated a minimum of $100,000 in revenue. Like, I've done just so many things over the years, and most of them haven't worked, or have worked okay, but not great. Could have worked if I stuck with it. For whatever reason, I just kept going back to books. This thing just kept hitting me over the head. And then one day I was like, oh, idiot, there's your sign. And then I decided a couple years ago, I was like, all right, next stage of my career, I'm going all in on this.
I was going to say, to what extent do you think that it's worth still aiming to be optimistically ignorant about, let's say, a new project or a new thing that you're going into? Because just like you say, I think the zeitgeist these days is, okay, you want to do this thing, go and figure out what the best practices are, go and learn from other people. And I think there's part of that that's still valuable, but there's also, like you say, there's incredible value in just going out there and trying something. So as an example, you know, let's say I just wrote a book and it's something that I wanted to write, or I was, you know, pushed to write. I wrote it and it's pretty much done. But now I'm like, should I still be spending time figuring out exactly how to optimize a launch and pushing back the launch date and, you know, trying to figure out the exact mechanics of all these things I should do? Or is it best just to put something out there and just see
You want to know the best way to sell a book is?
What is it?
Write another damn book. It's the best way to sell a book. I'm coming out with a book soon, right? The obvious choice. That's why we're talking here. And the next book is due out. I signed the deal with the same publisher. It's due to come out March or April 2026. I've told my team straight up, I do not expect things to really take off until the second book with this publisher comes out. It takes time. And if you keep delaying it, you're just pushing back that time. You don't know what you don't know. I'm of the opinion, perhaps this is pessimistic, but I'm of the opinion that most of the people out there saying stuff on the internet don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Not because they haven't had success, but because the world is just way too complicated. There's quite clearly so many things that we don't know and don't understand, way more than we do. And when you think about the nature of information, I've sold a lot of information over a lot of years to a lot of people, 200,000 plus customers in over 120 countries. Like, I've sold information basically every way you could possibly sell information, to the point where I understand the inherent issues with it, which is, in order to sell information, it needs to be packaged. Packaged information does not tell the whole story. In order to sell how to do something, you've got to go through a process that probably is always going to be best defined by fucking around and finding out. And then you have success. And then what you do is you create a post narrative of what had already happened. You smooth out the edges. You create some sort of framework around that thing. And then you package it and you sell it to others. And there's usefulness in that. Of course, you can skip a lot of the steps, but what you're often missing is that the fucking around and the finding out was most often the most important part of the process. And so inevitably what you need to do is, sure, find the best practices for a thing, but don't think that you should copy that at all. You take what's there and then you figure out how to combine it with your own unique experiences and kind of make it yours. And so I'll give you just one example. Like, the best customers in any business ever is a referred customer. Nobody can justifiably argue with me on that. They are easiest to convert. They generally have the best lifetime value, and they've come in as a referral, and so referrals are natural to them, and the odds that they're going to refer others are much higher. So why do you almost never, like, reflect on the information you see out there? Why do you almost never see information on referrals in, call it, the business porn ecosystem, where everything is superficial and cut off, right? It's not because it's not important. It's because it is harder to talk about. Referrals are a social transaction. It's a psychological problem. It's not an economic transaction. It's far easier for me to tell you what the algorithm's doing today, or how to A/B test a thumbnail, or how to write this little 5-line, I help X achieve Y as the bio on your thing, than it is for me to teach you psychologically what makes people refer. Right. Because they refer if they feel like it makes them look good in their social circle to be the guy who knows about a thing. You basically need to design into your business a way that makes them feel like they look good to others. An example is my friend Mike Dola started a nutrition coaching company called Stronger You, and then sold it for 8 figures and retired in his 30s. And one of the main things that he did that was so brilliant is that, oftentimes it's like, oh, hey, Janet, send me a customer and I'll give you a gift card to a clothing store or a coffee shop or whatever it is. And when you talk about it in an economic sense, what you actually do is you skew the social trade. And economically, that's always going to be a bad deal for the client. They know how much value they're giving you, and you're giving them an inconsequential nominal exchange of a gift, in exchange for that. You cannot, it's gift cards and thank yous like that, and gifts are fine as a reactive measure, as a thank you gesture, but they won't do anything to proactively generate a referral. Instead, here's what Mike did. When his client, it was mostly weight loss. They did some weight gain stuff too, but it was mostly weight loss. And so what happens is somebody's clothes will no longer fit. And so instead of saying to them, send me a customer and I'll give you a gift code to a clothing store, the minute that a client had a transformation where their clothes no longer fit, what he did is his coaches beforehand would find out what clothing stores their clients like. Just over the course of conversation, they would find it out and they'd notate it in their CRM, right? And then they would buy the person a gift code for like $500, like a lot of money, because this person has spent thousands with them. And they'll send them a gift code and they'll send it to them and say, hey, Janet, so proud of you. Look, I know your clothes don't fit. Here, I just sent you a gift card to Lululemon for $500 to buy new clothing. And hey, while you're there, why don't you celebrate it? You've done so well. Take a picture, post it on the internet of you on your Facebook of you buying new clothes. Like, how amazing. What a great way to celebrate yourself. Well, now what happens? Janet is at Lululemon. She's taking a picture. She's saying, buy new clothes because I lost all this weight because my clothes don't fit. Janet's sister, Janet's friend, Janet's colleagues are now messaging her saying, what the hell have you been doing? Oh, I've been working with this company. Boom. Referral. Right? That's how they did it. Like, that's how they did it. That's way better because what you're doing is you're making your client feel like the all-star and giving them a time when they want to talk about themselves in a way that's public, that's social, so that others ask them kind of what they've been doing. So we had a summer camp that did this to us. That was funny. We put my son in a summer camp, and this was so funny because it's one of those things where it's like, I kind of don't like this, but also want to pat you in the back because of how brilliant it was. So my son Calvin went to this like week summer camp, sports ball camp, whatever. And at the end of the week, he won the community award. Okay.
Nice.
So he won the community award. Exactly. Nice. Right. And then what I realized is that every kid wins an award at the camp every week. And the next morning, so he came home with this, with this badge that said, my son Calvin won the community award at whatever super fun sports camp. And so that's cool. So, he's proud. We show it to my parents, like stupid stuff that parents do. But like, that's not generating anything for the camp. But then, what happened the next morning, David? I wake up and there's a sign on our lawn. My son just won the community award at Super Fun Sports Camp. The camp goes around to the houses of every kid that had been at that camp that past week and puts a sign on the front lawn. One of those like plastic signs with the metal things, right, that goes in. I'm sure that they do this every week. Every kid that goes to the camp.
That's amazing.
I mean, you could obviously just take the sign and throw it in the garbage, but like your son's not going to let you do that. And so, of course, my neighbor David and Rachel are outside and they say, oh, that's great that Calvin, how did you guys like that camp anyway? It was fine. It was good. Yeah, Calvin enjoyed it. Oh, great. They send their kid to that camp the next week. Brilliant. Like, I don't love the fact that they came and put a sign on our lawn, but I could have taken it down. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So like you can, but why do you never hear about that? Right? Why do you never hear about this kind of stuff? This is the kind of stuff I talk about in my book. This is how you become the obvious choice. This is the 90% of business that still happens through mostly offline word of mouth that's behind the scenes that nobody talks about. I love it, man. I love looking at that stuff and I'm like, oh, you savvy bastard.
I was going to ask, is there a version of this that you either do and have done or could do for books or information online? Like if you don't have a physical type product where like, oh, I can show you how much weight you've lost, or I can tell you that your kid had fun at this thing, where maybe it's just like learning or something like that.
So number one, skin in the game is important. Costly signaling. I think in this day and age where everything is so easy to do, everybody knows that you've got a media kit in your pocket. Everybody knows that you can spin up a website for free online. It's just too easy to do a bad job and an easy job these days. And so as a result, costly signaling, going out of your way to do something that everybody knows is harder than it needs to be or more expensive, actually is a wonderful way to stand out. I remember years back, we did an interview with somebody. So I sold the first ever certification for online fitness I built, right? Which was an online course, but it was the first ever certification for online fitness. And I wrote the textbook on that. Well, I remember we did a case study, like testimonial with this guy named Charles Bell. Charles P.D. Bell was his name. He's in Arkansas. And I asked him, I was like, how did you hear about us? He goes, I didn't know who you were. I never come across your stuff. I never read your books before. You were just one of the guys that I was looking at because I knew that I wanted to do this thing. And then I saw that you had a textbook. And all that I could think was, ain't nobody going to go to that much trouble for some bullshit course. Ain't nobody going to go to that much. We mail a physical textbook. Well, what do we do a few weeks later? we send everybody these water bottles, right? This says Online Trainer Academy, if you can read it. There's like 15,000 of these water bottles out into the world. The key when you're giving a gift, this comes from somebody whose name is John Rulin. He wrote a wonderful book called Giftology, and John actually passed away suddenly this past year, which is really sad. But the book Giftology is a wonderful, absolutely brilliant book. And what he says and what I followed is that you have to look at professional gifting, just as one example. I think gifting's underrated, but you have to look at professional gifting the same way as you look at any marketing expense. How do you optimize your cost per impression or your cost per 1,000 impressions? The same as you would via sending a Facebook ad or a social media post or whatever it is. And so what you're doing is you're looking for items that have high repeatability, ideally in times when people are going to be socially in places with others who could be your customers. And you're looking for something that is not that expensive, but you can give somebody the best version of that thing that they own. So almost everybody has a water bottle. My customers are personal trainers. You use water bottles in gyms. Most water bottles that everybody uses are shitty plastic water bottles.
Yeah.
This is a beautiful insulated water bottle. The time when I first started buying them, they cost me $13. And it is the best water bottle that you're ever going to own for $13. And so they get used. And they get used all of the time, over and over and over again. So that's one example where these things, like for a number of years, you could not go to a fitness conference with personal trainers and not see 5 or 6 of these on the tables, like in front of the trainer. They're in the gym with other coaches, whatever it is. Oh, I think I heard something about that. All that it's doing is just improving the lift of your ads, your brand. You're seeing it. People are talking about it naturally over time. With the book, I'm going to spoil the surprise for you, but I'm sending VIP copies, right, with the book. And so they're going to arrive early January to influencers. And so we made 300 units of these things. And we made beautiful boxes with the books. We made this amazing package. And most people stop there, or they include a handwritten note. I did a few things with it. So number one is there's a letter that's mail merged. That's the same for everybody. But inside the book, I hand wrote Post-it notes and put inside the book because I want somebody to crack the spine. But I know that most people aren't going to read the whole thing. Somebody notable, whatever, isn't going to read the whole thing. But if I put a sticky note in the book and say, you're going to love this one section, they're going to read that one section, right? And hopefully they like it. At least, if nothing else, they've cracked open the book, which makes a big difference. So that's cool. A lot of other people do that. Here's what else I included in it. A metallic bookmark with a quote from the book. A metallic bookmark cost me $6 per unit. It flies for free. It weighs nothing. So the shipping costs are nominal because you're already sending a box. And a lot of people have bookmarks. A lot of people send bookmarks as part of packages like this, but they send shitty paper bookmarks that get thrown out. They cost 20 cents, right? For $6, I'm sending you the best bookmark you've ever owned in your life. And by definition, the bookmark has a quote. So the quote is a quote about fear. Failure is like a bee sting. Before you get stung, you're scared because you don't know how it feels. You hear that it hurts, but then you get stung and it does hurt, but you're fine and you get up the next day and then you're not so scared about it the next time. Failure is kind of like that. It's a quote that's general enough that you're going to want to use the bookmark, but it's a metallic bookmark. Nobody's going to throw it out. How many impressions now did I just buy with a $6 bookmark? Versus how many impressions did I buy with a 20-cent bookmark? And then the other piece of it is every single package has one of these watches. Casio F91W. I bought 300 of these watches. I spent $10,000 on these watches. And I think that Casio is the best watch in the world. The book is about simplicity. The book is about solving the damn problem eloquently, profitably, doing it in a way that is so simple and resilient that it doesn't matter what technological change comes in. You think about the Casio watch. They created the first ever digital watch in the 1970s. It does everything that it needs to do. It lights up. It has an alarm. It has a timer. It's a good size. It's cheap. And as a result, they've sold the same ugly ass watch for the last 50 years. It's the Bic pen. It's Craigslist. right? It's a beautiful story, and it's a story that perfectly sums up the book. And I wear it every day, and I talk about it all the time. It's like, cost me $25. Again, flies for free. Nobody's going to throw out a watch. So even if they don't read the book, right, people are going to be wearing the watch. People are going to be using the bookmark. Sure, they're going to be sharing a picture of it on social media when it comes because it's different. But then, like, for months and years that follow, how many impressions did I just buy? How many invisible referrals did I just earn for an additional $30 per unit? And I actually, HarperCollins is paying for the whole thing. So, I bought it for nothing. But I was able to convince them, right, a very old school publisher, that this is actually a great use of ad spend. I was like, spend the money on this. Don't spend the money sponsoring newsletters.
Right.
Don't spend the money on Amazon ads. I'd rather you spend $50,000 on these packages than you spend $50,000 sponsoring newsletters that's going to hit one time and maybe sell some books. It's going to be hard because we're not going to be able to measure it. But that's a couple examples of how, I'm always looking for things that maximize the number of impressions per cost dollar spent. And then I'm looking for things that are unique and tell a story, but also are the best version of something that's used all of the time, where people otherwise use something really, really cheap.
Yeah.
Can you send somebody like a beautiful mug to have coffee in every single morning? A $15 stone mug is going to be the best mug that they use, and they're going to have their coffee in it every single morning because most people have cheap stuff like this.
Jonathan, I love that. I love all of this. This is awesome. The bookmark one stands out to me specifically because, I have this podcast and I speak to people that have written books. And even just as you were saying, I was thinking of the number of times, I got a package from Penguin Books the other day.
Sure.
Some books from their authors. And I've gotten loads of book packages. I've got loads of bookmarks. I don't know where a single one of them is. I don't actually know where they are. I don't know what happens to them. I mean, obviously I treasure them and I take the picture and I greatly value being sent those things. Yeah,
one time,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
You know how that came to me? I'm glad and I'm excited to send you this bookmark and for you to use it all the time. But you know where it came to me? I'll tell you the story. It was after a workout with my wife and I. She was my girlfriend at the time. This is many years ago. And we were living in a place called Mount Pleasant, Toronto. We worked out at it's Good Life Gym. We just did a workout. And then we were hungry afterwards. And we were walking up the street. And there were these two young women that were outside giving samples for the store. You see it all the time, right? They're giving samples outside the store trying to get you to come in. And they said, tiramisu. And I said, excuse me. And they said, tiramisu. And then I still didn't know what they were talking about because I'm not French. They were like, and so they handed me a cup of something and it turns out it's Italian. That's how sophisticated I am. And they told me that it is a vegan, gluten-free Italian joint that just opened. Okay. Vegan, gluten-free Italian food is not a thing. Like, you're trying too hard. You know what I'm saying? Like I got nothing against vegans. I got nothing against gluten-free. I got nothing against Italian food. But like, those three things kind of naturally don't go together. Regardless, here's what happened. Normally, when somebody gives you a sample and you're walking by, you take the sample and you keep walking. But I stopped. Naturally, without even thinking about it, I stopped. You want to know why?
What?
They gave me a metal spoon with the sample.
Ah, okay.
They gave me a metal spoon with the sample. Convention dictates that you don't take somebody's metal spoon. And so then I'm sitting there and I'm eating the vegan gluten-free tiramisu. I don't know what tiramisu is, but I'm eating it. And it's like not awful. But then you're standing there and you're staring at them. And so what do? Oh, so what's this place? Right? Now there's permission marketing. Now there's buy-in, using Seth Godin's thing. Like, now I've asked them, now they have permission to tell me. So they tell me, it's whatever, it's gluten-free Italian. It just opened. We're doing the special and whatever. And Allison and I kind of gave that like shrug, like, sure, why not? So we went in and we spent $30 on like Nochi or something. Noki. It starts with a G. I don't know. And so, it was crappy. It was bad. And we never went back. So number one, of course, good marketing, no matter how brilliant you are, your product isn't going to win if your product sucks. But it got us to try it where we would not have otherwise tried it. And it's all because they gave us a metal spoon. And so the question that I always ask now is like, what's your metal spoon? It's not going to make your product succeed or fail. But what can you do? What's the one thing that you can do at that point where somebody either is going to walk by up the street and go somewhere else or stop and at least give you a chance? That's all that your product deserves or your service deserves. What's your metal spoon? What's that thing? And so the metal bookmark is my metal spoon.
I think I remember you telling another story as well of the guy who was selling, I think it was band-aids or plasters as we call them in the UK,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Uruguay.
Yeah.
And I loved that story, but I think that's another great example of, I mean, I'll leave you to tell it, but just the idea that reaching out to the right person in the right place at the right time and
Mm.
being very specific in who you reach out to can also have a massive difference as well.
There's a couple things about that story that I love. Number one is just the importance of being lost. And so we were living in Uruguay at the time. Don't ask, I don't know why, but we were living in Uruguay at the time. And so we lived in Uruguay for 4 months. And, Uruguay is, number one, when we were there, no English, like none. And Montevideo a little bit, but like once you get outside, none. And so we were just constantly lost. And Montevideo, the streets are largely named after either important dates or important people. And they're really long as a result, de Heji Ocho de Julio or General, whatever, Jorge Rosales or whatever, right? And so we had a paper map. The paper map showed too big of a space for the names of the streets. And so the names of the streets were constantly cut off. And because so many of the streets' names started with General whatever, we had no idea where we were going. Like we knew what street we wanted, but the map didn't say the whole name. It was General de ... on the map. And so we had no clue. So we were constantly lost. Nowadays, of course, you can just use your phone. And I encourage you, when you're in places like this, to not use your phone, to actually stress yourself and struggle just a little bit. Like, how bad is it if you really get lost in Uruguay during the day? Like, you're fine. It will challenge you a little bit to figure it out, which actually is very pleasurable versus looking at this blue dot with your face down on the phone and following that blue dot and knowing where your stop is and then getting off. So we would basically just get on a bus going in the right general direction. And again, the bus system wasn't really publicized, so we didn't know when the buses turned or anything, but we knew what direction we wanted to go to. And so if the bus turned, we just got off and walked a block and got on a bus that kept going. So I was on high alert, like looking at everything around as we were on the bus. And at one point, this guy gets on and he's got this like blue plaid button-up shirt that was tucked into his jeans, kind of covering this little paunch. And he gets on the bus and he walks right past the driver who doesn't pay. And he starts yelling, "Trita, trita, trita," which translates to shreds, which is, I guess, the word for Band-Aids. So he's yelling, "Trita, trita, trita." I was like, Band-Aids? Like he takes out this box and he's holding up an individual Band-Aid. I said, Band-Aids? Like, in New York City, they're selling chocolate bars, right? Like this dude selling Band-Aids. And all of a sudden, this woman calls him over and gives him a coin and takes a Band-Aid, and then another one, and then another one. And within one stop, 4 people bought individual Band-Aids from this guy. He gets off the bus. I see he walks across the street and waits at the bus stop, go in the other direction. And my guess is he was going back and forth. And then I thought about it. Well, Montevideo, the women, at least when we were there, this is like 8 years ago, still dressed up. It was very old fashioned that way. A lot of them wore heels. They were wearing dresses. But the streets are like broken cobblestone in a lot of places. And so these poor women's feet were all blistered and sore by the end of the day. What do they need? This guy was selling them the one thing that they need. There's a famous Gary Halbert story, the famous copywriter who wrote the Boron letters and stuff. And the story, he was in this room where he was teaching copywriters. And he said, if I have a hamburger stand, what do I want? What's the single thing that I need more than anything else to sell the most amount of hamburgers? And one person put up their hand and they said, great taste. Another person put up their hand and they said, great branding. And he says, you're all wrong. What you need is a starving crowd. What you need are hungry people. And so what this guy did, what Trita Man did, is he sold the perfect product at the perfect time to the perfect customer. And it was so amazing to see. And then I think about, these poor people on like the New York subway line that are trying to raise money for their kids' basketball team, selling chocolate bars, or my son Calvin is in Scouts at home. And they did a fundraiser where they sold apples outside of the grocery store. And all that I can think is, you can't do any better than that. You're selling an item outside of a grocery store by definition that somebody knows that they can get in that grocery store cheaper. Number one, you can't do any better than that. Number two, what lesson are you teaching these kids? You're basically teaching them that if they're cute, which they won't be for very long, people will give them money. That is a terrible fucking lesson to teach a child, isn't it? Like, that is not how you teach a child to market and sell. All that I can think is like, follow the example of Tweeta Man, sell Band-Aids to people who have got blisters. Like, that's what you do. I don't know where you came across that story, but I love that story.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do stay tuned for more. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps the podcast. And follow me on Twitter. Feel free to shoot me any thoughts. See you next time.